Integrating M1 controls with Lutron RadioRA 2. Today we will be discussing the hardware, the setup, and the programming requirements for Lutron Radio 2 devices with the M1 control. Before we begin, I want to just inform everyone that we will be at the CEDIA Expo September 26th through 28th in Denver, Colorado. So stop by our booth, 1129. We are introducing 2 new products, 2 new M1 kit packages, and giving away one of those new kits, along with other free items. So make sure you stop by our booth, 1129. In addition to that, stop by Lutron's booth, 1127, which is right across the aisle from us at CEDIA. So make sure you hit up both of our booths if you're going to be at CEDIA. Also, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Stay up to date, learn about our new products, M1 applications, and all of our webinars are on our YouTube channel, so check that out. How to ask questions. Type your questions in the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen. Anytime during the webinar, if you have a question, just type it in. We will get to as many questions as we can. Any unanswered questions will be addressed in the follow-up email that Amy will be sending out next week around Monday or Tuesday. This webinar will be recorded and will be made available on our website and YouTube channel. Our presenters today are Amy Strickland. She is our tech support queen here at ELK. And our guest panelist is Ryan Burnish. He's with Lutron, and he has had 7.5 years of employment at Lutron, and he spends most of his focused time on residential systems. He has worked in various roles over the years, from product development to platform quality leadership to outside sales. And now he's working in system sales, applications, engineering, and customer education. He's developing and providing trainings for our customer residential dealers, as well as working in the pre-sale process to find solutions for common and one-off applications for our products. So before we begin, we want to get to know our audience. We're going to ask a couple of questions, some polling questions. And our first question is, what is your level with the M1 control system? Are you familiar with the M1 control system? Are you not? Have you installed 1 or 2? Have you installed 3? So we're going to give you guys about 15 more seconds to answer this question. We just want to get to know our audience, and we really appreciate you answering this. We're getting a really great response. And a lot of you guys have installed M1 before. A few of y'all are not familiar, and we welcome you to our webinar. And I will be closing this poll in about 2 seconds. Thank you so much. And our next question is, what is your level of experience with Lutron RadioRA 2? Are you familiar with it? Are you not? How many have you installed? This is just a great feedback for our guest panelists, Ryan and Lutron, to get. And a lot of you guys are not familiar with Lutron RadioRA 2, so we're super happy that you have joined. A few of you guys, about 40% of you guys, have installed Lutron RadioRA 2, so this will be a great way to refreshing your skills and your knowledge. And I'll be closing this poll in about 2 seconds. Thank you so much, everybody, for answering those, and I would like to now hand it over to Amy.
Thank you, Jessie. Well, it's a great introduction, and glad we're getting some feedback from our audience today. We're glad to have you with us. We're going to be talking today again about the M1 control and integrating that with Lutron RadioRA 2. So I think from the poll, a lot of people are familiar with M1, but just to give you an idea, if you're not familiar, M1 is a cross-platform control, and what we mean by that is that it does more than one thing for you. So it can be your security system, your fire system. It can provide access control, lighting control, which is something that we'll be talking about today, also with the energy and task management and climate control, or we'll get into that a little bit today as well. In having all of those things integrated into the M1, you're going to be able to have scheduling of your different systems in your home based on based on arm state, time of day, different factors that the M1 has in place. So one of the benefits of that is being able to make use of some of your security sensors, like say a motion detector, to also act as somewhat of an occupancy sensor for lighting control, just for an example. You can control the M1 over the internet or a network with an Ethernet interface, and that provides smartphone apps and email alerts and different features through that network capability. We have a variety of user interfaces and a very expandable system. So, the M1 Gold out of the box is 16 zones on board. We can expand that up to 208, and we also can have 144 of those zones be wireless, including using the Elk's new two-way wireless technology. So that's just an overview of the M1. Now I'd like to turn it over to Ryan and let him tell you a little bit about the Lutron RadioRA 2.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And so, we will be discussing the Lutron RadioRA 2 system quickly. We want to give you a little bit of an overview. It seems like the majority of folks in this webinar have not installed RadioRA 2 before, so new perhaps to the Lutron product family, at least of RadioRA 2, perhaps even Lutron in general. So what is RadioRA 2? RadioRA 2 is a wireless total home control solution. Oftentimes back in the past, many years back, we had the tendency of saying it was a wireless lighting control system, but it is certainly much more than that. So most people know that Lutron manufactures dimmers. So of course we have the ability to control artificial light within the space. We do have also the ability to switch certain lighting loads or non-lighting loads as well. But beyond the artificial load control, we have the ability for daylight control. We manufacture all of our shades actually in Virginia. We have a wide variety of shading solutions, Venetian blinds, roller shades, insulating honeycomb shades. Besides that, we also have temperature control. So you can control not only the artificial lights and the natural light, but also temperature control from a variety of different sources, the RadioRA 2 keypads, you can see images actually at the bottom of the slide. And also we have a Home Control Plus app, which is an application for Android and iOS platforms. And then beyond that, we even have the ability to control some small appliances and plug loads to basically help save energy with the control of vampire currents in the space. So RadioRA 2 is certainly much more than just a lighting control system. It is certainly a total home control solution. And then when you integrate that with a system such as Elk Security, now you're bringing a true total home control solution to your end user. So let's go to the next slide. Go back a slide. There we go. So an overview of the RadioRA 2 network. This shows you a picture of the house, and it kind of helps you depict what exactly is taking place with a RadioRA 2 system, where devices go within the house. So, as you can see down below in the basement or perhaps in the equipment room, you're going to have your security system panels and your furnaces, right, your HVAC equipment. Up in the actual living space itself, there's a wide variety of devices. The first and most important one being the main repeater, which is basically our central processor, which gets tied into the network, or can get tied into the homeowner's network. But it would also then connect via RS-232 to your Elk security system. There's also thermostat controls, dimmers, of course, and again, the natural light controls, the shading solutions that would be distributed then throughout the house. Here's a slide showing you the products that are available, and there's certainly quite a few SKUs when you break it down, depending on which dimmer will meet your application. But we have a wide variety of dimmers that can control a wide variety of load types, whether that be your standard incandescent or magnetic low voltage, all the way to your approved LED and CFL sources. We have switches. We have a variety of keypads, some of which mount in the wall next to dimmers, other ones that sit perhaps on a kitchen island or in a nightstand in the master bedroom. Tabletop dimmers, also some plug controls as well. We have thermostats, as I said before. We even have battery-powered wireless sensors that will do everything that, if you will, for, like, let's say, a closet application or even a bathroom application, that will, have the lights automatically come on when you enter the space, but even more importantly, to save energy, when you leave the space after 1, 5, 15, or 30 minutes. And again, those are battery powered, so you don't even have to run a power pack to those. Pico wireless controls, which is another keypad a very intuitive keypad that's very cost-effective. Again, a battery-powered solution. The shading then, the shading solutions, as I should say, at the bottom of this slide, as you can see, there's a wide variety of those as well. Drapery tracked vertical draperies and your standard traditional draperies, tension shades, roller shades, and the insulating honeycomb shades as well. So we have a wide variety of products within the RadioRA 2 product family. But one of the key things to understand is how does RadioRA 2, how do all the devices in the system communicate? So as I mentioned earlier, in terms of communicating with the ELK M1 Gold panel, that would be through an interface using RS-232. But internally on the Lutron side, RadioRA 2 communicates between devices using what we call the Clear Connect RF protocol, wireless protocol. It is a proprietary protocol by Lutron. The low interference band that we operate in, 431 to 437 megahertz, the center frequency of which, or default frequency, if you will, when you pull a device out of its box and power it up for the first time, is 433.6 megahertz. We chose that band to avoid interference from the higher frequency bands. Perhaps it's around the 2.45 gigahertz range where you're competing with Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and also up in that range you're having the cellular networks. So there's a lot of data being passed around when those devices are in operation, which certainly that works for them in their applications. They need to have those bits moving back and forth constantly. But if you think about a lighting control system, really it's more of an action-driven system. So we only really need to communicate when a button is pressed or an action is driven into the system and outputs need to fire, whether that be a shade or a dimmer or a thermostat changing its set point. So we looked at that and said, well, we can conform then to the rules of this low interference band that the FCC says you cannot talk for more than 5 seconds at a time. So again, more of an action-driven system. So not only are we avoiding interference from those high traffic bands, but we also don't have a lot of RF communication going on even within our own system to clog our band down. It's only when something needs to happen. Two-way communication is certainly very important. The most important feature for that, I feel, is that when you press a keypad button in the RadioRA 2 system or a third-party system interacts with Lutron and drives an action, we can then trigger an LED status on a Lutron keypad to show that the scene that is set is indeed set. So the homeowner has some sort of indication that what they wanted to have happen actually did happen. Fixed repeater network. So there's two different types of networks that are common when you're talking about wireless products, especially system products for a resident. And that would be a mesh network versus more of a fixed network. In this case, we call it a fixed repeater network. Mesh networking certainly works for the applications that it's used in. A lot of times, basically the way that works is, you press a button in the system and the command's going to hop to one device, and that could be any random path it could take. It could go to a dimmer, perhaps, and maybe that dimmer then passes on to another dimmer. Devices might be passing the command along that aren't even actually supposed to even really listen to the communication, but everything is basically a repeater, and they're passing it down the chain. But there are some issues with that, especially as you scale the system up to a larger size. It can take more time to propagate commands through, and certainly there's also a reliability side of it too, where a lot of drop is going to have to start back over at the origin point and try a different path. And especially if you have any sort of tabletop controls, they might be mobile, and if you move them, they might fall out of range. So we looked at that and said, okay, that doesn't really meet what we want. We want to have a repeatable and scalable solution. We need to have high performance all the time, because when the homeowner expects their lights to come on, after paying the money for the system, replacing those existing switches, which, yes, they weren't as cool and they didn't do all those great things, but the lights came on when they wanted them to, right? We need to have that same performance, the same reliability. And it certainly needs to be scalable, because the RadioRA 2 product family, one of the key features of it is that you can go from two devices, basically a processor and a single dimmer, that could be a RadioRA 2 system, all the way up to a 200 device system. And it can be anywhere in between. You can add a device once a month. So a completely scalable solution. So we found that the fixed repeater network was the best way to go. And what the fixed repeater network basically is, so we have the main repeater, again, the central processor, and then for each main repeater, you can have up to 4 auxiliary repeaters to build your chain. So all the communication is always going through this wireless chain. If I press the keypad button, the command goes into the repeaters and then out to the devices. So what that does is, again, every single time I do something, execute an action in the system, the communication always follows the exact same path. So we have that repeatable performance that we're looking for. And from a scalability side, if we ever need to increase the size of our system and we're out of range perhaps of a repeater, we just add another repeater. The approximate square footage coverage of a repeater is 2,500 square feet. And then we have the other important thing when it comes down to scalability and timing of the commands moving through the system. That would be the group command. And basically what a group command is, perhaps it's even better to illustrate it first thinking about what individual or directed commands would be. And that would be if I press the keypad button. And it basically would say, okay, dimmer 1, go to 50%. Dimmer 2, go to 75. Shade 1, go to 65%, so on and so forth. So it's going device by device down the chain of what was programmed to it, which if you had a 10-device system, that may not be that bad. But what the customer does not want to start seeing is what we call a popcorn effect. So if you had a whole home scene that maybe affected 45 lights within the house, if they were using directed commands, you would start seeing where the dimmers would be popping on. It would be, since it's around the house, it would be more visually, say, not pleasing, if you will, to the customer, because they want to have that gradual fade on for all the zones that are part of the scene, not one zone turning on, and then another, so on and so forth, throughout the house. So what we looked at from a scalability standpoint and also that timing is that the idea of group commands, which is very similar to if you're familiar with football, a quarterback calling a play in the huddle. The quarterback has a very limited amount of time to actually make the call what play to run, and for all of his players to line up and actually execute the play. But the quarterback's not the most intelligent person on the team. The other players all have a brain. They're all able to understand their role. So what the quarterback basically is going to do is he's going to go in there, say a line of gibberish that the other team hopefully doesn't understand, and the players are going to hear that, and based on what they hear, they're then going to execute whatever action they're supposed to execute. And that's kind of what we're doing. So if we press the keypad button like entertain or maybe welcome, the welcome scene, that command goes out, says welcome, and all of the devices hear it. And if they're part of that play, they then execute the play as they are programmed to do. So they'll go to their light levels or their shade levels, or the temperature controls will change their set points. But it's all based off of just the word, perhaps, welcome being said by the keypad. And the devices are smart enough to understand what that means. So that's what group commands are. So whether you have that 2-device system that I talked about, the processor and 1 dimmer, or a 200-device system, you're not going to notice any sort of degradation in timing as commands propagate through the wireless network itself. Now, in terms of device placement, this is always key. So in terms of between the repeaters, as you're building your chain out, again, each repeater, we like to say approximately covers about 2,500 square feet of house. That's always a good rule of thumb, because when people talk about residences, they talk in terms of square footage. How big is your house? 10,000 square feet, 8,000 square feet. And based on that, you can get a good idea for how many repeaters you're going to need. Now, if you need to add another repeater, an auxiliary repeater, remember you can have up to 4 of those per main repeater, and you can have a total of 2 main repeaters on the system. 60 feet wirelessly between repeaters when you're building your chain, your RF chain. And then 30 feet from each device to a repeater in that chain. Those are the specs, the RF specs. Now, those are not maximum. Those are what we like to consider worst-case specs. So we don't want to be throwing out at you, hey, this will work up to 100 feet within a living space, or maybe it's 300 feet in an outdoor and unobstructed environment. Because if you say up to 100 feet, or if it's 300 feet in an outdoor environment, that really doesn't help you when you're inside a residence. Because how do you design to that, right? If it's up to 100 feet, maybe it's not. Because the reality of it is we're not living in outer space. We have walls to contend with. Even air eventually is going to attenuate your wireless signals, of course. So because of the attenuation of these signals, we wanted to give specs that were real world that you could design to. And when you design to them, and you plugged all your devices in, you wired them all up, the last thing you're going to have to worry about is whether the products will actually be able to communicate to each other. So if you stick within these specs, you're guaranteed to get the performance that you want out of the system. You might find that a dimmer might go 70 feet to a main repeater. But again, it's going to vary based on the construction materials of the house. So 30 feet from any device in the system to a repeater in the chain, and 60 feet wirelessly between repeaters. We also do have the option between repeaters to wire them up to 1,000 feet for perhaps a pool house or some sort of outbuilding that you would like to have as an extension of the main house system. So those are the device placement guidelines for ClearConnect. Now, taking what the Lutron benefits are, certainly, again, the ambiance, the energy savings, the convenience of being able to come home and you can press one button from your car and illuminate a safe path of light to, through, and around your home. You have those benefits with Lutron, but now what can you do by combining that, integrating that with the ELK M1 Gold system? So one of the biggest benefits when you're using ELK as an integration partner is that they have the ability to control individual RadioRA 2 devices as well as trigger the standard security scene reactions that you would expect with the Lutron lighting control system. So traditionally, we have what we call full flash mode, which is our basic security mode that we always like to offer with our systems. And the idea behind full flash mode is this. If you think about cars in a parking lot and the car alarm's going off, does anybody really care or pay attention to that? No. Unfortunately, people just kind of walk right by and they just ignore it. No one really seems to care about audible alarms anymore, other than the fact that they're annoying. But if someone's breaking into your house, chances are, and there's an alarm going off here at Lutron here in the background. Someone's apparently leaving the LCI in their office. But that was weird. So perfect timing. So what full flash mode is, if you think about a house that doesn't perhaps have any sort of landscape light control, right? So their lights aren't automatically coming on. Maybe the homeowner forgot to turn those lights on without a RadioRA 2 system. So now the property's kind of dark, right? Now that it's nighttime, that's a great target for someone to break into your house. So what would the RadioRA 2 system do for security? Well, first of all, yeah, we do have time clock. We can turn your landscape lights on. And a well-lit-up property is certainly a deterrent for crime. But then if someone is still brave enough to approach your house and try to break in, right, you have your ELK security system backing you up. So as soon as an alarm is triggered in that system, the ELK panel tells us through RS-232 that, yes, there's an intrusion alert, and the Lutron system reacts by turning all of the lights inside the house to 100% full bright, all of the outside lights flash, all of the shades open. So now what you've done is you've exposed the intruder to the outside world, to the neighbors, to the emergency personnel by opening the shades. The lights are on full, hopefully giving the guy the idea that he needs to now leave the house. And the flashing lights are also good for the neighbors to see, perhaps call 911 if you haven't already, or obviously if you have the ELK system, it can go right out and go to the emergency personnel that way. But certainly then the police, we've heard plenty of times them complimenting that flashing as they're trying to drive these windy roads at night, right? They know where the house is, but they're not quite sure. It helps them see the house much faster and not have to look for mailboxes or address numbers or things like that. They can see the lights flashing. So these strong indicators to hopefully, again, get the intruder out of the house, protecting the family, but also to alert neighbors and emergency personnel. So that's your standard scene reaction. But then it's also, then you have the convenience scene where, as you come home and you disarm your system on the ELK side, then the ELK panel sends us a trigger that says, okay, RadioRA 2, turn on your welcome scene. And what the welcome scene then is a safe path of light, again, to, through, and around the home. Whatever the path you take when you come into your house is, maybe you go to the kitchen for a snack, maybe you go to the master bedroom and kick your shoes off, get comfortable. Whatever that path may be, that's the safe path of light. You illuminate the core of the house and that path you take so you feel comfortable coming home to your house. That can all be triggered through the ELK system. You also have arm away. Perhaps you're going to dinner for a few hours and you want to obviously arm your system and you're going to be away, so now your sensors are going to be active. But you also want to trigger an away scene where you turn off the majority of lights in the house so you save energy if you're not going to be home. Why keep them on? And maybe you leave a couple lights on the core of the house to make it look a little bit lived in. But you can do that all from the ELK side, driving actions through the RadioRA 2 system. And then also arm stay. If you're going to sleep, you're going to be staying in the house. That arm stay command could trigger perhaps a good night scene. So as soon as you go to the ELK keypad and trigger arm stay, most of the lights in the house go off. Leave a little bit of light on the core of the house, maybe the hallways, to guide yourself to the bathroom if you need it in the middle of the night. But all of these actions triggered from the ELK system. And the other thing that ELK has that's very important is also control of individual RadioRA 2 devices. So the ELK system actually has the ability, aside from security actions, to use their keypad to go in and control individual zones within the RadioRA 2 system, which is a feature that many systems, many third-party systems, do not have. So ELK has all of those great scene functionalities with security on top of then the individual device control, which is extremely key. So looking at the basic hardware setup, and I know, Amy, you want to chime in on this as well. You know, again, from the RadioRA 2 side, you have your keypads, whether they be wall mount or tabletop. You have your dimmers, you have your thermostats. All of that's the Clear Connect RF, that two-way communication with a fixed repeater network, 433.6, speaking to the main repeater. Then you have on the main repeater, it has an RS-232 port, which will then connect into the ELK M1 XSLU interface, which then goes back to the wired link on the ELK M1 panel. And that is, from a physical connection standpoint, that is actually how you're going to set up the hardware between RadioRA 2 and the ELK security system, so that you get that integration functionality we talked about, whether that be full flash for intrusion, disarm and a welcome scene, or individual control from your ELK keypad. And Amy, I don't know if you want to add any more to this slide.
I think you did a great job there. I mean, we have basically a direct link to the main repeater, so that's how we're sending the commands out. The M1 XSLU connects to the M1 data bus, so it's going to follow the same wiring and termination rules that any other data bus would, data bus device would follow. So for those of you who are familiar with the M1, this is just another, standard data bus device that you're going to wire into your hub or to your data bus. And it is an addressable device. It's part of the serial expander type or family of devices. So if you have other serial expanders for other integration, of course you're going to want to make sure that you don't duplicate addresses here. But beyond that, I mean it's standard data bus setup for this device. All right, so we want to kind of point out to you some things that you need to know when you're going to be integrating Lutron RadioRA 2 with the M1 system. The RadioRA 2 network has to be set up using the Lutron PC Essentials inclusive software. So you can't, integrate the M1 with a, manually set up RadioRA 2 system. It has to be through a PC setup system. In order to use that software, to get a hold of that software, you do need to complete training with Lutron. They have a level 1 training that they offer online. You can also, take a live course, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but it is something that you definitely want to do. Now, all of the Lutron RadioRA 2 network, everything that's part of that setup needs to be completed before the ELK is brought into the equation. And I'm going to pause here for just a moment and check with you, Jesse. Do we have any questions at this point? Okay, I'm not sure if Jesse's with us, but we're just going to continue onward, and if we have questions, we'll address those in just a little bit. So, like I said, the Lutron software, in order to obtain that, you do need to complete training. But Ryan, if you maybe want to just give us an idea of what you do in that software, just a overview.
Sure. Yeah. The Essentials software. The difference, first of all, when you hear Essentials and Inclusive, Essentials is our level 1 software. Inclusive is our level 2 software. The difference, major difference, being that the Essentials is for 100 device systems. So you can have 100 devices per one main repeater. The main repeater will count as one of those devices. There are 4 addresses reserved for auxiliary repeaters, and then you can have 95 other system devices, dimmers, thermostats, switches, shades, however you would like to, obviously build your system. And if you have a second main repeater, you would need the Inclusive software, which is, again, a level 2 training. There's a little bit more complexity with that in terms of laying out the system. So that's why we do have a level 2 live training for that. But if you're looking currently at the Essential software, that blue bar on the slide is actually right from the software itself. So we have 4 tabs of the software. Starting from left and going right, it actually will step you in the order that you need to go in to commission a job. So the design phase, in that step, that's where you're going to actually go in and create rooms based on the rooms that are actually in the house that are going to have RA2 devices in them, whether that be the kitchen or master bedroom or basement, whatever that might be. You lay those rooms out, and then you go in each individual room, and you add the devices themselves that are going to live in that room into the software. So you're going to go to the living room, and perhaps you're going to add a dimmer. And then within that dimmer, you're going to set up the various parameters that are going to help you configure the model number that you need. So the cool part about the software, one of the good things about it, is that it doesn't really ask you to add model numbers to it. It asks you basically to build your application, and then it tells you which model number will meet that. So it's very hard sometimes to remember all the SKUs for every manufacturer, so it's kind of nice in that realm. But again, you're just going through and you're actually just literally designing your system, adding the devices where they need to be. Then the next step is actually having the devices, or basically telling the keypad what they're going to do when you press buttons. That's the programming side. So you're basically going through and you're building macros, essentially, where you would click on a keypad button, you select a keypad button, and then you add the dimmers, the switches, the shades to those buttons, and you tell those zones what levels they're going to when those buttons are pressed, and you're going to be giving that button a button logic and LED status. So we have a couple different ways we can go about showing you LED status, and that's covered in the courses themselves. That can certainly get confusing, especially for a webinar like this. So we won't talk about anything in detail there. But programming, I think everyone gets that. Again, building the macros and telling the buttons what they're going to do when they're pressed, building your time clock event. The activate step is where you actually will then physically associate your devices together. So the main repeater will look for neighboring systems. If it sees any, it will choose a different channel within that 431 to 437 band to avoid any crosstalk between systems. And then once it gets beyond that point, the devices will go into activation mode, and you simply go around the house, and you can hold a dimmer button down and associate it to the system. And then besides just associating the devices to the system itself, you also are going through the process of saying, okay, which dimmer is this? Is it the dimmer in the basement? Is it the one in the bathroom? Is it the one in the master bedroom? So on and so forth. So that's what's happening in the activation step. And then finally, once all the devices are activated, they're associated together, you go to the transfer step, and that's where you're going to take the database that you build in your PC and go through the Ethernet into the processor and actually transfer the data to the main repeater or processor. Once that step is done, then the main repeater will then pump out that device information. We talked about group commands and how the devices have a lot of intelligence built in. So the final step will be the processor actually pushing that information out to the devices. And once that's complete, the transfer is done, and now your system is up and running. So 4 basic steps all through the configuration software. The software also has a variety of tools. You can build bill of materials. There's engraving report, because you can get your keypads custom engraved. It's included in the price of the keypads, which is kind of nice. So all those types of tools can be found in there. There's also a tool for RF diagnostics if you need to do any sort of troubleshooting. That's all built into the software. Setting limits on your shades. So the software is a very powerful but yet easy to use tool to help you configure your system.
Thank you for that, and I just want to pause before we're going to get into the more technical side of the setup with the ELK, and before we do that, I'd like to see if there's any questions.
There are some questions to Amy. How many M1X, the Lutron interface, how many can be used on an ELK?
Really, you're looking at just having one of those. Now, it's a Type 5 device, which is a serial expander device, and there's a limit on the system for 7 of those. You can't have more than 7 of those, but really you're looking at just needing to have one of these Lutron interfaces on the M1.
Okay. I have another question. Can I do the integration with just the M1 serial expander and Lutron main repeater without an M1 keypad?
The keypad is not required for the integration. It's a user interface that's a point of control of the Lutron once we're interfaced, but the keypad itself is not really involved in the integration. Of course, we recommend that there be at least one data bus keypad on all systems, but as far as whether or not you need a keypad to interface with Lutron, you don't. The keypad's just a user interface. It's not really an important integral part of the integration. That's all done through the M1XSLU and the main repeater.
And then I have one more question, then we can move on. If we do not have a central heating system but dashboard heaters in every room, do you have to install a thermostat on every unit?
Yeah, to answer that question, and HVAC can certainly be a challenging discussion because there's so many varieties out there. But yes, if it's more of like a zone-controlled system, depending on the system that you're using, there might have to be an actual zone controller. But typically, yes, the thermostats themselves would be controlling one zone apiece. So if you have a multi-zone system, you would certainly have a thermostat per zone.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to again get into a little bit more of the technical side of how you get, once you've gotten the Lutron RadioRA 2 network set up, how do you get the ELK to integrate with that? So we went over the hardware connections previously. Now we're going to get into the programming side of it. And where you start with this is actually getting an XML export, so to speak, of the setup, which you're going to get from the main repeater. Now this is something that I get a few phone calls about from time to time. There is, and I don't have a screenshot to show you or anything, but there is some kind of export option within the Lutron software. But that's not really what we're looking for to import the lighting data into the ELK. We want to pull that data directly from the main repeater, which is done over the network. So if you have a computer connected to the same network that the main repeater is connected to, you're going to be able to pull up that address for the main repeater in a browser and get the XML file, which you can then save. And we have detailed instructions on how that's done in the installation manual for the M1 XSLU. But the main point to drive home here is that you need to get that directly from the main repeater and not through the Lutron software. So once you have that XML file, then you're going to be able to import that into the ELK-RP software. So I've got a couple screenshots here. So you can see under automation on the left side, if you right-click on lighting, you're going to get a little drop-down box here, and import lighting data is one of the options there. If you select that, then you'll get your import lighting data screen, and we have a special export file format option for Lutron RadioRA 2. So you would select that as your format, and then just browse to where you had saved the file from the previous step. From there, you've got a few options here related to if there's data existing there, how does it handle it? In most cases, you're just going to clear what's there and let it put in what it finds from that file. For Lutron RadioRA 2, we do not need the opt bit or the opt flag selected, so we want to leave that as is. We do not need to enable that for this particular lighting product. The show flag just determines what's shown on user interfaces, so if you want to have that list of lighting devices that you can control individually on a keypad, then you're going to want to show those, and you can enable the show flag for all of those devices here. And then of course the voice description, which is primarily used for the telephone remote control, is something that you can either leave as is or clear. Once you've made those selections, you click the import button, and you're going to get a screen similar to what you see at the bottom here with the yellow indicating where it imported new devices, new data, and of course the ones that are controllable directly from the M1 will have the format as serial expander. The next thing that you're going to want to do if you have thermostats, you're going to need to go through a few steps to set those up. Now at the top of the screen here we're looking at the actual lighting list, but you can see we have a few thermostats listed there by name, and you'll notice that those have format standard, not serial expander, and that's because we're not actually controlling those through lighting commands. We're going to be controlling those through thermostat commands issued through rules. But we do need to look at this and make note of the IDs for each of these. And so you can see here we have a thermostat at 19 and a thermostat at 30, and of course the lowest node number would be our thermostat 1 and going up from there. So you go to the thermostat screen and name those accordingly. But you also need to make note of those numbers, that 19 and that 30. That's going to be important in the next step, which is setting up a text string. Now we need to set up two different text strings in the M1 software. So you're going to find text right above rules here on the left side of the screen. And you're just going to create a new text string. Now the first text string that we need to set up is this DE text string, and that is telling the M1 when discovery mode has ended. Now discovery mode is something that our interface goes through during power up, and that's when it learns all of the devices that are part of the RadioRA 2 network. We need to know when that ends so that we can then send this next string, which is going to be directly related to your thermostats. So you'll see this second string, we have a TS. This is our thermostat string, and then we have these numbers. Now these are the numbers that we saw on the previous screen as our thermostat ID numbers, 19 and 30. One thing that is important to mention here, if you have an integration ID for a thermostat of, say, 8, it's device number 8, that needs to be entered in this string as 08. It's important that it be entered as 2 digits. It will not work correctly if it's not. Once you set up these text strings, then you're going to want to write a couple of rules in your system to let the system know when to set the discovery mode has ended so that it can send out this thermostat string, which allows us to properly display the thermostat data in the M1 and use those thermostats. So you can see when we're looking for a string to be received in the whenever, we're looking at the port number. Now this port number is directly related to the address of your Lutron interface, your M1XSLU. So in this case it was address 4. We're looking for that to be received from port 4, our discovery end. We're going to be turning on a phantom output for 3 seconds. We're basically just putting in a 3-second delay here. Our second rule triggers when that 3 seconds is up and that output's turned off, and then we send out our thermostat string. So that's probably one of the more complicated things that you have to do when you're setting up the Lutron, is get these text strings set up correctly, and of course, you know, case and syntax is very important in all of that. So those, you know, if you're having trouble with your thermostats, that may be the first place to look. Before we get too far into rules, I just want to check with Jesse and see if there's any questions on it. Like I said, I know that thermostat part can be a little confusing.
Amy, I do have some questions. One, can you have both Lutron and other lighting controls at the same time? For example, Lutron, Z-Wave, Insteon, are there configurable addresses to prevent overlap?
It's not really recommended to mix technologies, especially when you're working with things like thermostats. You're going to run into problems there. So, you know, we do not recommend mixing technologies. You know, while it may technically be possible on some level, the issues that you're going to run into are you know, really just be best to stick with one technology.
Okay, and then I have one more question, and then we can move on.
Okay.
If you were doing a 200 device 2 main repeater system, would you use one M1 serial expander for each main repeater, or would one serial expander handle both main repeaters?
Well, if you have 2 main repeaters, you're not going to be able to hook both of those directly to one serial expander. There may be some kind of interconnect between the 2 main repeaters that would eliminate the need for a second serial expander, and maybe you can help me out with that, Ryan.
Yeah, I was going to say you only need one because the full database is stored on both repeaters. So you can send the same strings into the system, and it will cross the bridge if it needs to through Ethernet. The 2 repeaters will be connected via the local area network, the Ethernet. But yeah, you only need to send strings into one, and it'll control the entire system.
That makes sense.
All right,
Thank
you guys.
All right, so now we're going to talk about some rules examples, and we're going to just go through a few different examples, and you know, then maybe field some more questions at the end. So I'm just going to go ahead and start into the rules here. The rule that you're looking at on the screen now is a pretty straightforward rule, and this is one that you know, if you have a motion detector that's part of your alarm system, you can make use of that for lighting control as well. So you can see here on the rule we're looking for that motion detector become not secure and the system is disarmed, so that would be referencing the arm state. Then we're turning on a particular device, and so this is where we may be controlling an individual device as opposed to a group type scene. We can see there we're setting that to 30%, and we can also control the fade rate, and we're determining how long to turn that on as well. So there's, you know, a lot going on in that little rule there, but that basically would allow you to, just like Ryan was saying, you know, a closet example or somewhere that you may have an alarm sensor already in place, you know, maybe in a room that you want to turn the light on when you enter and then have that automatically turn off. The next rule example that we're going to look at is scene control. So we were just looking at controlling an individual light, but here we can, within the M1, we can define a scene as a task. Now you can also activate scenes directly, so if you already have a welcome home scene defined in the Lutron, then you're going to be able to go ahead and activate that, but you can also do some defining of scenes within the rules. So, and we refer to those as tasks or macros there, and so you can see we're just defining that. We want particular wall keypad. So we're controlling a button on that wall keypad by issuing a command to that, and so that could be controlling a scene, and then we're also just setting some thermostats there. And then we can activate that, say, when the system is disarmed. So by setting this to 4% on a keypad. Now that the keypad is not a directly dimmable device, but we're using these dim commands to control the button. So by setting that to 4%, I'm actually activating button 4 on the keypad. And so we're doing some things a little bit differently here with some of this stuff to make use of those buttons on that keypad. The shade control is achieved through issuing lighting commands, and in this example we're actually issuing a command to the main repeater. The main repeater has what I think I'm using the right terminology here, phantom scenes, so to speak, and you can set those up. But is that the right terminology, Ryan? Or?
Yes, that is the correct terminology.
Okay, so I believe the main repeater has up to 100 of those that can be controlled from the M1, and again we're controlling which one of those phantom scenes that we're controlling by issuing a certain dim level to the main repeater. And so in this example we're setting off phantom 11, which is our watch TV scene that's been programmed into that main repeater, and that's going to allow us to control the shades. You maybe adjust the lighting as well. A lot of things will happen there, but that's how that shade control is done. And we do recommend, as far as from the ELK perspective, that you control shades through button or phantom activation. I may have gotten a little ahead of myself, or maybe I don't have my slides in the right order here, but we were just talking about the main repeater and those phantoms. Those are pre-programmed scenes that we can control, and again we're doing that by sending certain percentage dim commands to the address of the main repeater, which is pretty much always going to be address 1. You're going to send, like for instance, we're sending 10, and that's activating phantom number 10. We're doing that when it's armed away, and we're also issuing some commands to the thermostats. Now again, you could have those thermostat commands built into that phantom on the main repeater if you wanted to. So just showing you a couple of different ways you could go about doing that. We are also able to issue commands to the visor control receiver. It has group commands, and this is where you're going to find like your alarm flash and your solid on demand, and the M1 can activate those by again sending particular percentage dim commands to the address of the visor controller. And so you can see here we're looking at the alarm being activated. We're issuing commands to the 18 and 19%, which are going to activate those flash and go solid commands through the visor. And of course then we're cutting those back off when the alarm turns off. And the flash group is 18 and the solid group is 19. Okay, this may be a good time for us to field some questions. Of course, what we're looking at here is your next steps, and Ryan, if you would like to take it away here and talk about your training options, and then we'll field some questions.
Sure. So to get started with RadioRA 2, again, we have multiple levels of training. The first one, to get access to the Essentials programming software, and again, programming software is required for doing this integration with the Elk Security, the M1 Gold panel. Then there's two ways to proceed. So you can do an in-person training, which we hold those around the country at various distributors, and those are, the scheduling of those is controlled by the local Lutron representative team. So if you're interested in going to an in-person training, it would be a one-day training, typically starting 8:30 or 9 o'clock and going until about 4 or 5 p.m., certainly depending on the trainer. But the way to find out what those dates are would be to get in touch with, you can get in touch with Lutron, or if you already know your local Lutron rep, you can do that as well. And you can email ra2training@lutron.com, and they can get you in touch with your local Lutron rep if you need be. The online training is certainly one that I do recommend, just because the content in that is certainly somewhat more canned, if you will, and it has all the information that you need. The other good part about it, too, is if you take that training, it's certainly the same time commitment. There's pre-recorded modules that you're going to listen to, and you can do it at your own time, which is very convenient. But also, once you've completed the training, then you have the ability to go into your account and actually rewatch those modules at any point in time to help kind of relearn anything that you may have forgotten since the last time you install a job. So those are the two ways to go. Online training is certainly more flexible, but there are in-person trainings if you're interested. And again, if you are interested in either of those, feel free to email ra2training@lutron.com for more information. Then we always like to talk about the insulating honeycomb shades qualification training, because certainly the shades business is growing very fast. And we start out with the insulating honeycomb shades because they are the easiest to install. They are actually battery powered as well, just like our sensors are, so you don't need to actually wire any power to these window treatments, but they are part of your Lutron system and subsequently are controlled then from your Elk system as well. The training itself is about a 2-hour training online, and then there's an exam at the end of that. And that training, again, is found on the same website, lutron.com/LCI online. You have to create an account for either of these online trainings. But once you have that account created, you pretty much can see the schedules for the other trainings out there. So maybe once you complete level 1 training, you want to go to level 2. The registration for level 2 training is done through the same website. So LCI Online, this is our learning portal for our customers. So again, you can find this insulating honeycomb shade qualification training. Again, it's a 2-hour training. You take an exam, and then the final thing you would need would be to purchase a demo or binder, which you can get from many distributors around this country. And the point being, it's going to be hard to sell shades if you don't have something to show your customer. But once you get that, then you'd have the ability to also start dealing these insulating honeycomb shades as well. So a lot of training options that are available to you, very easy to start and get into, and certainly encourage you to do that. Again, if you have any questions at all about any of our training programs, feel free to reach out to ra2training@lutron.com, and they will get you the answers that you need.
Thank you for that, Ryan. And if anyone out there is interested in M1 training, we would recommend that you either look out on our YouTube channel, watch our webinar on M1 basic training. We did that webinar last week. We do that webinar monthly, so if you want to attend a live training, you can look on our website. Our next M1 basic training date is October the 4th. Would like to go ahead and check with Jesse and see if we have any other questions. We've got just a couple of minutes. Maybe we can answer a few questions.
I do have a couple of questions. One question is, how often do you have to change the batteries on the shades?
The battery life, on the average battery life in the shades, we say it's 3 years. Now that's based on, it's going to be based on the fabric, mass, and everything like that. But the 3 years is based on 2 ups, 2 downs per day with an average size window, which is a 3x5, 3 foot by 5 foot size window. And that would be single cell fabric as well. So that's where we come up with a 3-year lifespan. I do like to joke around with people. I have the system at my house. I have a test site, and my friends come over, and plus my son too. He gets a hold of my iPad, and sometimes the shades are moving a lot more than 2 ups, 2 downs per day because you kind of enable the ability to do so. But if you think about, normally if you're controlling your window treatments at home, I think 2 ups, 2 downs per day is pretty normal for most people. Most people don't really touch their windows much more than that. So, 3 years on that. But just watch out. If you have a 3.5-year-old, the shades might be going up and down more than twice. Just put it to you that way.
Amy, does the Lutron HomeWorks QS also integrate with ELK?
No, we only integrate with the Lutron RadioRA 2 at this point. Now there is some older options for the original Lutron RadioRA, but at this point it's just the RadioRA 2 that the ELK is interfacing with in this manner.
Okay. And then will Send Setup in Lutron PC software show in the Task tab of the M1 software?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but the tasks in the ELK RP software is basically a place where you're naming ELK macros that are then defined by rules, so nothing is getting imported there. Again, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but maybe that's the answer anyway.
Okay. Any questions that we cannot answer or we are confused or we don't have time, we will always email you guys with the follow-up email your answers. So if I do not get to your question, just it's okay. We'll get it in the follow-up email. Amy, how do you control ELK from an iPad over the internet like M1 to Go?
There's an app for the iPad. It's actually a family of apps called eKeypad that's available through the App Store. That is an app that was developed by a third party. It is compatible with the M1 and allows quite a bit of functionality and control. There are different versions of it depending on how much you want it to do. If you just want it for the security side, or if you want to be able to access things like your lighting, your thermostats, and then there's even a version that incorporates video into the same app. So just depending on what you want it to do, there's different versions at different prices, but again, the app family for the iPad is called eKeypad. Now, if you're looking for something similar on an Android platform, there's an app called MyKeypad, and again, there's a couple of different versions just depending on how much you want it to do, but both of those apps are third-party developed.
Okay, and then I'm just going to do one question, then we'll be done. How do you terminate a security mode on a main repeater Phantom? The Lutron software says you have to send a button release command to the Phantom button. So how do you terminate it?
Ryan, does that question sound like something that you may be able to answer? I'm not.
Right. So typically, if you're in full flash mode, we have the intrusion alarm come in from the ELK system. So the minute that someone would disarm their security system, again, clearing the fault, essentially, the RadioRA 2 system will then return or revert back to the light levels that the house is at prior to the intrusion. So really, it's that disarm command that is going to then restore the lights. Once you actually go to the alarm panel and actually stop the alarm from going off, that's when it would go out of that mode.
And so looking at the example here on the screen, you're whenever any alarm, any area cuts off, and that could be more specific, it could be a burglar alarm, you can write the whenever part in various ways, but in this example it's just any alarm. The cuts off point for us, that is when the alarm has been cleared by the user, and so then we're issuing a command to that particular it's like, say, for the flash, we're issuing to the visor 18%, and then the off for us, or the deactivate, is that fade rate 7, whereas the activate is the fade rate 0, and that's how we differentiate that. And of course, by issuing the fade rate 7 to the 18 dim level for that particular device for the visor, then it's going to return those back to the previous state.
All right, well, that is all the time that we have today. Thank you, everyone, so much for attending. And on the screen, you can get all of our contact information for Lutron. Visit lutron.com and elkproducts.com for more information on RadioRA 2 and our M1 control. And Also, connect with us online, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube to stay connected. And just another reminder that we will be at CEDIA Expo September 26th through the 28th. ELK will be at booth 1129, and Lutron will be at 1127. Thank you, everyone, for attending.